4 months after President Trump announced his plan to shake up the global economy.
Tonight, Canadians brace for economic turmoil as the reality of a full-blown trade war with the U.S.
U.S. national debt has reached a record $37 trillion.
Contracts worth billions are vanishing overnight. Machines that once built the future now sit silent in empty Midwestern factories. Across oceans, Japanese utilities, German automakers, and British defense firms are rerouting orders, not to Detroit or Houston, but to Toronto and Vancouver. What happens when the world stops calling America and starts dialing Canada? If the shift continues, it's not just trade at risk, but jobs, power, and security at home. How far has the ground already shifted beneath us? And how much further can it slide before something breaks? Number 1, United Kingdom. The special relationship collapse. The unthinkable has happened. America's oldest ally, its closest cultural partner, and the cornerstone of the so-called special relationship is now quietly building a future without the United States. That ally is the United Kingdom. And this shift represents the most shocking betrayal in the entire list. For over 2 centuries, Britain and America moved in lockstep. From the Marshall Plan to the digital revolution, the relationship was considered unbreakable. But today, that bond is cracking apart at a stunning speed. Brexit was supposed to draw Britain closer to Washington. Instead, it exposed just how unreliable American partnership had become. Political turbulence, regulatory uncertainty, supply chain chaos. British firms found themselves unable to plan for tomorrow. Canadian suppliers stepped in and offered what America no longer could: predictability, stability, and business divorced from politics. The results are staggering. British imports from Canada surged 45% last year, while U.S. imports collapsed by 22%. Aerospace giants like Rolls-Royce and BAE Systems now source critical components from Canadian partners. Pharmaceutical leaders once tied to UN suppliers are shifting toward Canadian firms with friendlier regulations. In technology, British companies wary of American surveillance are trusting Canadian providers for cloud infrastructure and data services. But the most telling moves are in energy and finance. Britain's nuclear revival is fueled by Canadian uranium, not American. Renewable projects are being built with Canadian developers. London's financial institutions are routing capital and transactions through Canadian networks to bypass U.S. regulatory entanglements. Even British pension funds and banks are pouring billions into Canadian infrastructure. This realignment isn't just commercial. Cambridge, Oxford, and Imperial College now pursue joint research with Canadian universities instead of American ones. Cultural and educational partnerships are drifting northward as confidence in U.S. stability evaporates. The consequences for America are severe. Manufacturing towns across the Midwest are watching British contracts vanish. Silicon Valley companies are losing British clients to Canadian competitors. Defense contractors fear a hollowing out of transatlantic cooperation. A senior British trade official summarized the quiet revolution. America became an unreliable partner that treated every deal as politics. Canada treats business as business. The implications extend far beyond trade. Britain is America's closest intelligence ally, its bridge to Europe, and a core NATO partner. If Britain is systematically choosing Canada over the U.S., it signals a collapse of trust that touches every dimension of alliance. The special relationship that survived 2 world wars and the Cold War is being quietly dismantled, not by hostility, but by Canada's reliability. And if America can lose Britain, it can lose anyone. So after watching allies from Brazil to Britain walk away, one question remains: how close is America to the edge? Number 2, South Korea, the innovation defection. South Korea, the nation that defines precision and technological excellence, is quietly dismantling its economic ties with America. The birthplace of global smartphone technology and advanced manufacturing is now redirecting its future northward, toward Canada. And the scale of this shift represents one of the most devastating technology transfers in modern history. For decades, America was the indispensable partner. From post-war rebuilding to the digital revolution, U.S. suppliers provided the materials, components, and expertise that fueled Korea's rise. But that partnership is now being replaced at breathtaking speed. It started with critical materials. Korean manufacturers operate on razor-thin margins, where a single delayed shipment can cost millions. When American suppliers became unreliable, tangled in regulation and political interference, Korean firms turned to Canada. Quebec lithium, Ontario cobalt, and rare earths processed in Canadian facilities began flowing across the Pacific with guaranteed schedules, fixed prices, and no political strings attached. What began as sourcing quickly grew into something much bigger. Samsung, LG, and SK Innovation are now transferring advanced manufacturing technology directly into Canadian facilities. Proprietary processes that took decades to refine are being taught to Canadian engineers. R&D centers in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal are absorbing not only Korean capital, but also Korean intellectual property. Entire supply chains are being rebuilt with Canada as the hub. Semiconductors, precision electronics, battery production, and even AI development are shifting away from the U.S. and into Canadian provinces. Investment has followed. Billions of dollars from Korean corporations and banks are funding Canadian infrastructure, joint ventures, and industrial expansion. The automotive sector shows just how far the realignment has gone. Korean automakers racing into the EV era need stable access to battery materials and components. Canadian suppliers offer multi-year contracts with guaranteed delivery. American suppliers offer political uncertainty. The choice was simple and devastating for U.S. producers. Silicon Valley is already feeling the shockwaves. Tech companies report losing Korean contracts worth billions. Manufacturing hubs in Texas and Arizona are scaling back. Research universities are watching funding for joint projects evaporate. Even defense contractors, once assured of Korean procurement, are being sidelined as regulatory disputes sour political trust. A senior Korean executive summed it up. Innovation requires predictable partners, not political ones. Canada provides the stability we need for the next decade. The consequences go far beyond economics. South Korea is America's most important ally in containing Chinese influence in Asia, and a critical partner in the technologies that will define the next generation. Losing Korean partnerships means losing influence over the very standards of global competition. But even this technology defection pales compared to the betrayal now unfolding with America's closest ally. Number 3, India, the tech talent exodus. India, the world's largest democracy and a natural U.S. ally, was supposed to be America's 21st century success story. Shared values, complementary economies, and massive markets promised an unbreakable partnership. Instead, that relationship is dissolving, with India redirecting its future toward Canada. It began with immigration, American visa restrictions, bureaucratic delays, and cultural hostility turned collaboration into punishment. Indian technology firms that once relied on seamless access to U.S. talent pipelines faced constant barriers. Canada offered the opposite: streamlined permits, residency pathways, and welcoming communities. The result has been a migration of talent and capital. Indian IT giants are shifting operations from Silicon Valley to Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Software development, AI research, and digital innovation once flowing through California now pulse through the Mumbai-Toronto corridor. In just 18 months, Indian technology exports to Canada surged 78%, while contracts with U.S. firms fell 31%. And technology is only the start. Indian pharmaceutical companies like Dr. Reddy's and Cipla are expanding Canadian distribution while scaling back in the U.S. Agricultural importers are sourcing Canadian canola, wheat, and specialty crops instead of American grain. Billions in purchasing power are moving north. Education mirrors the trend. Indian students frustrated by U.S. visa limits and campus hostility are choosing Canadian universities in record numbers. This isn't just lost tuition revenue for America. It's a generational shift in human capital, innovation, and future entrepreneurship. Investment flows confirm the realignment. Indian venture funds are financing Canadian startups. Tata, Reliance, and other conglomerates are building Canadian research hubs. Joint ventures in renewable energy, from solar to hydroelectric, now link Indian engineering with Canadian infrastructure. Technology transfer, once centered on California, is being rerouted to Canada. The fallout for America is stark. Tech firms in California report losing hundreds of millions in contracts. Universities face declining Indian enrollment. Defense contractors are watching procurement shift away as bureaucratic restrictions complicate cooperation. One Indian executive summed it up simply: "We needed partners who celebrated our success, not feared our competition." Canada became that partner. The implications extend far beyond economics. India is the fastest growing major economy, the world's most populous nation, and a critical counterweight to Chinese influence. When Indian institutions choose Canada over the U.S., America's ability to shape global technology, trade, and geopolitics diminishes. Losing India is a seismic blow. But what comes next is an even more shocking betrayal of history's deepest alliances. Number 4. Mexico, the continental realignment. For 3 decades, Mexico and the United States built the most successful trade relationship in the Western Hemisphere. Raw materials flowed south, intermediate products moved north, and finished goods crossed the border again for global export. That back-and-forth integration created millions of jobs and fueled hundreds of billions in trade. Now that seamless system is unraveling. Mexican manufacturers have grown weary of American political chaos. Tariffs appear without warning. Border inspections change overnight. Labor requirements shift with every election cycle. Companies that need stability to plan production months ahead find themselves hostage to Washington's dysfunction. Canada sees the opening. Mexican imports from Canada surged 51% last year, while purchases from American suppliers dropped 19%. Automotive giants in central Mexico are now sourcing electronic components, precision machinery, and advanced materials from Ontario and British Columbia, bypassing Texas and Michigan entirely. The aerospace sector shows the change most clearly. Once dependent on U.S. suppliers for high-tech parts, Mexican firms now work almost exclusively with Canadian companies. Production timelines that once stretched months are now measured in weeks. Quality control that required multiple border crossings now happens inside integrated Mexico-Canada facilities. And the shift goes beyond trade. Mexican corporations are investing in Canadian factories, embedding engineers inside Canadian operations, and forming joint ventures that combine Mexico's manufacturing muscle with Canada's materials and logistics networks. Technology transfer that once flowed naturally across the Rio Grande is now concentrated in the Mexico-Canada corridor. The energy sector has flipped as well. Mexican industry, once reliant on U.S. natural gas and electricity, is now turning to Canadian renewable projects. Solar and wind farms across Mexico are being financed and built with Canadian partners, not American ones. The fallout north of the border is already visible. Manufacturing towns in Texas are losing contracts. Transport companies in Arizona are seeing trade volumes decline. Entire supply chain networks built over decades are being dismantled piece by piece. One senior Mexican trade official put it plainly: "We need partners who bring consistency, not politics." Canada became that partner. The consequences reach beyond economics. Mexico is America's largest trading partner and a critical ally on immigration, narcotics, and regional security. When Mexico's economic future is aligned with Canada instead of the U.S., it weakens not just trade, but the foundation of North American security itself. What was once held up as the model of continental integration is fast becoming a case study in how political dysfunction can break even the strongest alliances. Number 5, Germany, the precision engineering exodus. For 75 years, Germany's industrial miracle was inseparable from America. Marshall Plan aid, U.S. technology transfer, and integrated supply chains powered everything from BMW assembly lines to BASF chemical plants. American innovation was the silent backbone of German precision engineering, but that partnership is collapsing at breathtaking speed. The numbers tell the story. In just 2 years, German automakers have shifted 43% of their North American component sourcing from U.S. suppliers to Canadian ones. These aren't minor parts. They're advanced battery materials, precision alloys, and specialty chemicals critical for electric vehicles. Why the shift? American suppliers became trapped in their own politics. Endless regulatory uncertainty, trade disputes, and supply chain disruptions made long-term planning impossible. For German engineers who build production schedules years in advance, unpredictability is fatal. Canada offered the opposite: fixed-price contracts, guaranteed delivery windows, and stable regulations. In other words, reliability. The exodus has gone beyond trade. German industrial giants are embedding themselves directly into Canadian soil. BMW, Mercedes, and Volkswagen are funding Canadian manufacturing expansions, opening R&D centers, and training Canadian engineers in proprietary technologies once reserved for U.S. partners. German chemical titans like BASF and Bayer now source industrial catalysts and polymers from Canadian facilities, many of them built with German capital. The money flows are staggering. Billions of euros are being funneled into Canadian infrastructure projects, chemical processing plants in Ontario, precision machinery lines in Quebec, renewable energy hubs designed to feed German factories for decades. What began as emergency sourcing is rapidly solidifying into a permanent industrial alliance. The fallout in the U.S. is severe. Manufacturing towns in Michigan and Ohio face layoffs as contracts vanish. Chemical plants in Louisiana scale back production. Rust Belt communities once tethered to German precision are watching decades of partnerships dissolve. One senior Berlin trade official put it bluntly: "We cannot build Europe's industrial strategy on suppliers who use trade as a political weapon. Canada treats business as business." And that's the real danger. Germany is not just Europe's economic engine, it's America's closest NATO ally. When German firms abandon U.S. suppliers for Canadian ones, the shift is more than commercial. It signals a loss of confidence in America's stability itself. What was once America's permanent advantage in global markets, German precision engineering, is fast becoming Canada's newest strategic asset. Number 6, Japan, the silent energy revolution. For 7 decades, Japan's factories were fueled by American energy. LNG terminals, coal shipments, and U.S. expertise powered everything from post-war reconstruction to the rise of high-tech giants. But that partnership is unraveling. The problem wasn't price, it was reliability. American LNG exports became tangled in regulatory delays and political fights. For Japanese utilities that depend on precision scheduling, even small disruptions risk blackouts and billions in losses. Canada saw its moment. New export terminals in British Columbia offered what America could not: predictable schedules, long-term contracts, and zero political complications. The result has been a mass exodus. In just 18 months, over $23 billion in energy contracts have shifted from U.S. suppliers to Canada. Japanese conglomerates are now locked into Canadian deals through 2035, and energy was only the beginning. As Japan pushes into electric vehicles, The raw materials no longer come from American partners. Lithium from Quebec, cobalt from Ontario, and rare earths processed in Canadian facilities now flow directly to Tokyo's factories. The knowledge transfer followed the minerals. Japanese engineers are embedded in Canadian labs, co-developing new techniques and building innovation hubs in Toronto and Vancouver. Toyota, Honda, and Nissan are opening research centers across Canada, funding mining expansion, and training Canadian workers in advanced manufacturing, all bypassing U.S. supply chains. The partnership is now spilling into renewables. Japanese firms are investing billions into Canadian solar and wind projects, embedding themselves into the country's long-term energy future. What started as emergency sourcing has become a permanent alliance. The consequences for the U.S. are painful. Energy hubs in Texas and Louisiana run below capacity as contracts vanish. Mining towns in Wyoming and Montana are scaling back. Supply chains that once felt unshakable are unraveling. As one senior Japanese energy executive put it, "We cannot build our industrial future on suppliers who treat energy as politics. Canada treats energy as business. And when the world's third largest economy chooses Canada over America, the shift signals more than lost contracts. It signals a crisis of confidence." Number 7, Brazil, the agricultural superpower's choice. Brazil, the breadbasket of the world, has long fed hundreds of millions with soybeans, beef, and coffee, powered for over a century by American technology and expertise. But that alliance is breaking apart. In the last 18 months alone, Brazil's imports of Canadian agricultural technology have surged 71%, while contracts with U.S. suppliers have collapsed by 24%. The reason is simple but profound. American companies focused inward and limited by export rules tried to repurpose equipment made for Iowa cornfields to fit Brazil's mega farms. It didn't work. Canadian firms took another path. They sent engineers to live on Brazilian farms, studying the realities of tropical agriculture and operations spanning millions of acres. Out of that came systems built for scale: precision irrigation, AI-driven crop monitoring, and supply chain integration that U.S. firms simply couldn't match. And the shift goes far deeper than equipment sales. Brazil's largest agricultural conglomerates are now pouring money into Canadian research labs, co-developing seeds, fertilizers, and processing tech. The flow of innovation that once ran from America to Brazil now runs through Canada. Brazilian companies are buying Canadian operations, setting up processing plants, and weaving new supply chains that bypass the U.S. entirely. Generations of Brazilian expertise in large-scale farming are being transferred north, with agronomists and engineers working permanently in Canadian facilities. The consequences back home are staggering. Midwestern manufacturers are watching billion-dollar orders evaporate. Seed companies are bleeding market share. Agricultural research universities in Texas and California are losing their global standing as innovation hubs shift northward. Towns in Nebraska and Kansas, once thriving on farm equipment exports, are downsizing. The shock waves are spreading through supply chains once thought unshakable. And if losing the world's agricultural superpower is devastating, America's next blow, from its closest ally in Asia, could prove even more catastrophic.